What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Joe with Meteoric Serpents coming back at you for episode number 9 of the Colubrid Corruption Podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, April of House Snake Morphs. Very excited to bring her on. She has a very awesome and, in my opinion, underrated group of species of snakes. And honestly, I think they should be more popular. So we are going to get into it today. Guys, as usual, all my social medias are down here below. Instagram, the YouTube. Make sure you're hitting that like button on today's podcast. If you're enjoying, hit that subscribe button so you can get more content. And I'm going to start videos again, guys. I really want to record some content, get videos of all the different species I'm keeping, do different things. So be on the lookout for that. Probably going to start next week. So that should be fun. Let's see what else. Morph Market, obviously, as I say, I have some snakes available, some ball pythons, a couple Texas rats. So if you're interested, let me know. And lastly, I have been talking about it almost every episode. I started feeding my rat snakes some quail. If you want to diversify your diet, I would recommend hitting up Blake's Exotic Feeders. He's down here in South Florida for all my South Florida people. Really good. They're much healthier than rats, a lot leaner, and just overall a better meal. And I think diversity in diet is definitely key to some healthy snakes. So let's see who is in the chat real quick, and we will bring April out. Eric's More Factory, thanks for being here, my man. Brian from Heath and Hatchery, what's up, dude? Wiz, my dog, what's up? Morph Valley Reptiles, Ryan, hope you're doing good. Ivory Colubrid Co., what's up? I think this is your first time here. Maybe you've been here before, but thanks for tuning in. Solid Serpents, thanks for sharing out that picture today and tagging me in it. That was cool. So hopefully, yes, we get to learn about some house snakes today. Don D, Uptown, what's up, man? Goff, Casey, April is an awesome person to learn from. I think so too, and we'll learn some stuff today. Garden State Pythons, Pete, what's up, man? And of course, Kevin, past guest of Colubrid Corruption, Kevin Barron. And last one in here, Alvaro Clover's Reptiles. I did stop by his place and Kevin's place. Awesome collections. We had a really good time. But guys, without further ado, I do not want to hold up our guest for too long. Let's bring her out, April of House Snake Morphs. April, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, as we kind of said before, we were talking beforehand. I heard you first on Colubrid and Colubrid Radio with Zach and Clint. Obviously, I talk about them every episode, so that's how I found out about you. And then I saw you posted that you were vending at the Orlando Repticon, which I didn't know you were even local in Florida, or maybe I missed that from the podcast. But yeah, so I was like, well, I'm going. I got to talk to her and try to have her on the show. So after some time, we're finally doing it. So just excited to have you here. And yeah, let's talk about what you have. So if you can give us, however long or short you want to go, your kind of introduction into reptiles and just how you got into it in the first place.
Well, I've been in reptiles since I was a toddler. I used to, my dad's house actually was on a river, and on the riverbanks there was the Puget Sound garter snake, and that was my first snake ever. And I used to just catch him off of his property, just wild caught ones. Of course, I was really young, and I'm not exactly a spring chicken anymore, but it's been a while. But yeah, long time. That was my first snake for sure. My parents could not control me on this as much as my mother did try. So eventually they gave up on that. I had some wild caught garter snakes that gave birth. And so I had some babies, just not bred them, but they just, were gravid from the wild. And we ended up selling some of those babies to like different classrooms and stuff, real cheap, of course. But that was kind of my beginning of all that. I was a kid actually
Yeah.
when it started. And then when I got a little bit older, I ended up going into a pet store, and this was in Alaska actually, because that's where I was
Oh,
originally
wow.
raised. Um, and they had brought in some black house snakes, and
Okay.
I just thought it was so cool because it changed colors, and they were about the same size, so I already had like the caging kind of worked out for that because they're kind of similar in size to garter snakes. So
Right.
I kind of fell in love with this female, and so I bought her and brought her home, and she laid eggs too. But I hadn't ever incubated eggs, so I lost those the first round. But I think
Okay.
I was 9 years old, so not like it was a long
Right.
time. But yeah, that was my first house snake, and I've kept them pretty much ever since, and
Awesome.
just kind of always were into them. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So I can say my first hands-on experience with the house snake. So I've talked about it before, but I worked at a pet store in New York for a while. The only house snake we ever had there, and it was there for years, was a black house snake. And it was honestly one of my favorite snakes in the store, between the iridescence, how like small it was, and just super docile. And I was like, this snake is amazing. I'm like, it was one of my favorites to take care of in there for sure. Someone eventually bought it years down the line, but yeah, so I've always had an interest in them and then seen them a little bit more. So yeah, so now you've been keeping them for basically since then. Let's get into those a little bit, because I know they're an interesting group of snakes. Now I know they're, hearing from your last episode of Colubrid and Colubroid, they are technically a colubroid, and they're more related to I believe than other colubrid species. Was that correct?
Yeah, they are actually closer to a lapids than they are to, like, say, corn snakes. So you could
Okay.
definitively say that they are closer to a cobra than they are a corn snake,
Yeah.
which is
Interesting.
interesting. You know,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, they're very smart. Um, they're a lot smarter than I think a lot of snakes kind of get credit for. They do learn who their people are. If you walk by them on a feed day, the odds are you're going to end up seeing them come out to, see if you're out there to feed them and stuff instead of hiding,
Okay.
which is kind of fun, I think. It's a
Yeah.
lot of fun. It's cool that they change colors. A lot of people like that. A lot of people get kind of panicked about that at first if they don't know that and they get one. So I try to tell people about that. Like, if your
Right.
black house snake suddenly turns like a light column olive green, that's totally normal. It just does that sometimes.
Right.
Um, we don't really know exactly why. I would say it's kind of like a day night change thing because you mostly see it at night, but they do it at any time whenever they want, and it's hard to say.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah.
Okay. So let's go into each species a little bit, because I know there are a few different species spread across Africa, and let's stick with just the house snakes for now, and then we'll get into some of the others. So what are you? So I know you're kind of. Would you say that you're kind of the main person in the U.S. producing different house snake morphs and all those African species?
I wouldn't know for sure. Like, it's hard to say because I know
Yeah.
everybody in the U.S. But
Right. Right.
I would say, as far as variety of morphs go, I probably have the largest collection.
Okay.
I know there's a few other breeders of them that
Yeah.
have, because I also have mentored a few people that I
Yeah.
know have some of the rare ones that I have now. Um, but yeah, I guess so. I never want to like claim that though. Like, I'm
Yeah.
never be that guy. But
No, but I mean, when you have a business name like House Snake Morphs, and I just see how kind of uncommon they are, and
interesting
seeing.
story how that happened.
Yeah.
Actually,
Okay.
my original business name was Arctic Exotics
Okay.
because I was originally licensed in Alaska. So
Gotcha.
that's where that started. And then when I moved to Florida, I joined up with another breeder, And then the House Snake Morphs page was originally a Facebook page that was the division of that business. And so it was just like, here's me showcasing the House Snake Morphs. And then when we split, me and that former business split up, it became its own page, and I went out and just got its own business license and the whole bit. So it wasn't originally intended to be the business's name, but it just came that way because it was.
But
built
hey, I mean, it's fitting, right?
Page.
It's pretty fitting.
Yeah. It's House Snake Morphs and more, but yeah,
right.
That's how it started. It just started as a place to show off the cool snakes I was working in, and now here we are, a few hundred snakes later. So
yeah. All right, so let's talk about kind of the different species. So we already mentioned the black house snakes, and now I know there's quite a few different species and then different color phases of some of those species. So can we kind of get into the nitty gritty of those a little bit, if you don't mind trying to?
For sure. So the first thing you have to understand about house snakes is the taxonomy is a total and utter mess. They're constantly revising it. They're constantly flipping it around. The last revision, I believe, was just in 2021, where a lot of the Lamprophiids got elevated into their own subfamilies. So they're not technically Lamprophiids anymore, but they kind of put them back in all the time. So one of the things that's good to know about that is the house snake keepers don't tend to be as, for lack of a better word, snobby about the hybrid situation, because you can think that you have two of the exact same species, and in a year from now they won't be the same species, and all of a sudden now you're a hybrid breeder. Like this happened with, for example, the butter. Okay, so that's a morph, and the butter is a greenhouse snake that's bred to a Cape house snake albino, and then those offspring would then be 100 head albino and 50% green. You breed, that's actually called an allumo, by the way, and then you breed those two back together and you create the butter, right? Well, originally that wasn't this; those were the same species originally. And then eventually, and they're beautiful, but eventually the greenhouse snake got given its own species, and so now it's a hybrid. So there's that. And then, so lots of times there's stuff that kind of goes on with that. Like, for example, I strongly don't think that the Togo stripe and the black house snake are the same species, but they're currently legally listed as the same. And I don't believe it. I don't believe it at all. So to give you, so Lamprophiis fuliginosus, right, which is another species that's black house snake and also currently listed as the Togo stripe house snake. That's its scientific name, right? Then you have Boedon capensis, right, which is most of the morphs that you see are either crosses of or just Cape house snakes, right? So that's what that one's scientific name is, right? Well, you can breed a black house snake to a Cape house snake, and I've done that, and I've created both the T negative and T positive black albino hybrid that way. But I have yet to be able to breed a Togo stripe to any Cape. I haven't been able to do it.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And then
so it's telling you that like they have those different behaviors. So you would expect the Togo, if it really is a black house, you would expect it to also be able to breed to the Capes.
Yeah, you would think so. And then other things, Togos get a lot bigger than blacks. A lot.
Okay.
So it's like, I really don't think they're the same. I think eventually we're going to get a split of that. And then it gets even muckier when you start talking about Boedon lanitis, which is, or lineatus. It's kind of hard. Everybody pronounces it differently. So there is a dwarf house snake called the Tanzanian, right? Which their scientific name is Boedon lineatus, right? But a lot of people will sell the Togo stripe, commonly imported and all that, as Boedon lineatus, which it's not. And then you get people that, and because there's a significant price difference between the two, you kind of see people that would prefer that their Togo stripe be a lineatus, simply because it's more expensive, because it would be more rare, but it's not. So you get a lot of mess when it comes to taxonomy. So we kind of tend to be a little more forgiving about it than I think
Okay.
other groups of snake keepers do.
Gotcha. So I can say we see this mess in the North American rat snakes, which
For sure.
I keep the Texas rat snakes, and those aren't technically their own subspecies anymore. They're lumped in with Western rat snakes, and then anything on the East Coast. So all the gray and yellow rat snakes, like they're all considered the same thing, and even they look completely different. But that's what we have to deal with right now. I do think the Pantherophis keepers are a little bit more snobby about hybrids and stuff, depending on who you ask. But no, so that's really interesting to hear, and it's so unfortunate about taxonomy, because I've talked about it with a couple other people with rhino rat snakes, because they started saying that there's this brand new species of a locale of the same snake, and one of my past guests, Billy Hunt, informed me that it doesn't really take a lot for someone to say, oh, it's that now.
Billy Hunt, I know him. Good people.
Yeah. He kind of explained that, like, oh, you kind of just need a few people, like not as high qualifications as you would think. So it's just interesting to see how that happens. And it's unfortunate that it gets into a mess for hobbyists like us who are just trying to, keep some snakes and keep lines pure and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, for sure. For sure. We have a lot to deal with as far as house snakes go, especially when you're starting to talk localities. I know that that's something that a lot of colubrid breeders can kind of sink their teeth into. House snakes have localities too, and we have our own issues, if you will, with localities.
Okay.
And it really is important in our case because it changes the phenotypes. The way that they look is changed by the locality. And I don't think I've ever actually had this discussion on anybody's podcast, so you get to be the lucky first.
Awesome.
So, yeah. So cool things. So if you're good with it, we can
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Because I know that a lot of people have these kind of questions, so it'd be good to get it out. So locality does matter in house snakes, and I'll explain why. So we have a couple. One, so each of the greens and each of the reds have their own localities too. But let's just talk green separate and red separate first. So for example, let's go KZN red, right? So a KZN red is a cape that is from an area called KwaZulu-Natal, which is, but we shorten it to KZN because that's a mouthful.
Okay.
And and the soil there's a little bit redder, and so the snakes there developed red pigment, and it is gorgeously red, especially when line bred towards it. They tend to be born a little bit more brown. Like most house snakes kind of tend to have kind of like a reddier color right out of hatching, and that just kind of helps them survive until they kind of get the hang of it.
Right. Okay.
And then you'll see more color. And they can fire up and down too, which we'll get into polygenetics here in a sec. We'll get to that. Okay. But so you have that. That's basically KZN red, right? Then you have red Kenya, which is from Kenya. I'm not exactly sure if they qualify as folliginosis or not, but that's the current understanding is they're a folliginosis. And then so they are born red, so just right out the bat, and they have kind of like a yellow eye with a black pupil and kind of like black rings. And if you've seen enough of them, you can pick them up right away. It's easy to tell, and you can tell them apart real easy. Because KZNs tend to have like spotty kind of bodies patterned to them, because they're mostly cape, right? And then the red Kenya tend to be very solid colored. Now, why this matters is the phenotypes change as you start breeding them into other things, right? So if you breed them into a cape, right? If you're breeding a KZN to a cape, you're going to have an easier time of that because they're closer together, right? For one. But for two, you're going to see more pattern in those types of pairings because they naturally have that pattern as it goes down. Whereas if you bred a cape to a red Kenya, you're going to see less pattern because the locality is less pettered, right? So it does kind of matter, right? So then you'll see, and then one of the really big things that I try to get across to people when they work in localities is you do need to know what percentage of blood that animal carries. So, for example,
Okay.
if you were to breed a pure 100%
Yep.
Red Kenya to a Cape, those offspring now have 50%
Yes.
blood because they're one parent, half the other. So that's 50%. Okay. So if you were then to breed to 50%, say you bred a Red Kenya to an albino, because this is a common one, then you would have 50% red blood, and they would be 100% het albino, because albinism is recessive. So, and our albinos are not compatible. So that's another thing to know. Our T negative and our T positive cannot be bred together.
Makes sense.
Well, you would if you bred them back, but then you would. And there's even a double albino, which is T negative and T positive. But moving on, back to the Red Kenya story. So if you bred those back together, you would still have 50% blood, and now you would have a visual albino. So when you see somebody marketing a Red Kenya albino, right now, the odds are very, very, very good that that's 50% blood, because that's the only way to make one, right? Now, I have actually this last year bred back a Red Kenya albino to a Red Kenya to get 75s, and I will be hatching some 75s this year. But unless you've been in it for a while, odds are, and you'll never get back to 100. You know what I mean? Because it always
of course.
So that's important to know, because if you were to breed a 50% blood to a Cape, you now have a 25% blood. And at 25% blood, you are not going to see any real differences between a Red Kenya albino that has a 25% blood and a normal albino. You might get a little tiny bit, but you're not going to see. And we don't typically call those Red Kenya albino anymore, simply because there's not enough Red Kenya blood to actually make a red albino. You're just making albinos with some red blood. So that's kind of a big deal, because when you see people marketing, like on Morph Market all the time, it'll say Red Kenya albino, and it looks like just a standard albino.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, have you just seen so much at this point and bred so much at this point that you could pick up where someone casual like me who knows nothing, I maybe not be able to tell the difference, but like you're like right away like, hey, that ain't right.
I do sometimes at shows, I'll see people market albinos as just Red Kenya albinos because they think they can make more money that way, and that's sad. That makes us all pretty mad, because it gives off the impression that animal is what a Red Kenya albino looks like, and then I'll bring something to a show that actually is the real, 50% blood, and they'll see it and they'll go, "Whoa, what is that?" And I'm like, "Well, that's the actual Red Kenya albino. It's a way animal." And we have that across greens too. So greens, we have Uganda green and we have Zambian green. And major differences between them too. Zambians tend to be brown as babies, and Ugandas can be kind of brown as babies and kind of grow out of it, but they're much more green right off the bat. And they have colored eyes, whereas Zambians tend to have green or yellow eyes, where Ugandas have kind of like a orange kind of eye. And there's some other differences too. Zambians tend to be a little smaller. So there's a few things. Zambians have been used in the creation of other morphs for way longer than Ugandas. So if it's like a butter, it's a Zambian. But again, we run into that same problem. So like say you take a butter and it's 50% green and it's, a visual albino, and then people go, "Oh, well, I can breed this to my albino and make more butters." No, you didn't. Because you have to have that 50% blood in order for it to show up. So that's something that I think needs to be cleared up amongst people who are getting into house snakes, because the last 3 or so years, it seems like there's been kind of an uptake of like people that are kind of marketing stuff that isn't really what it is. So we're we're hoping to see more people putting percentages on the blood.
Right. Okay.
Because,
Interesting.
yeah.
Before we move along, Kevin Barron was asking in the chat, will a 75% red albino look more red albino?
Yes, absolutely. The more red you put into it, the more red that the offspring will be. So right now I have a 75 red that's het albino, and I have bred her to a 50 red. So that one will be, six, whatever the division of, of 75 and 50 is,
Right.
6 something. That should
Is
be,
that where you get 62 and a half, I guess? I think.
that's,
Yeah. Okay.
but it is important to mark your blood percentages if you don't want to upset your customers, if you're going to work in house snakes,
Right.
because if you're going to invest in, say, like a hybrid red Kenya albino, you want one that looks red. You're not going to want to pay the extra, $150 or whatever it works out to be for one that looks exactly like the $125 albino that you already had. So I think it's only fair. And typically speaking, you're going to lose a lot of those phenotypes at below 50% blood. So we got to kind of create more of that 75 and up that we're trying to make. But yeah, there's significant difference even between a 75 and a 50, because the 75 pretty much loses all of its pattern from the Cape side and goes back into being more patternless like the red Kenya would be. So yeah,
Gotcha.
it's easy to tell them apart.
Gotcha. And just want to go back to what you were saying about people mislabeling things. I've talked about it with other people on here. It's just, it's unfortunate that we have to see stuff like that still. It's like, why can't people just do this with integrity and breed their animals the right way and label them accordingly? And then it hurts the people like us who are trying to do right and,
Right.
be like up to par with freaking everything and have everything tracked. And, then some people just come along and slap a price tag and a name on it and try to make a quick buck. So,
Yeah. It's unfortunate, but it's part of the job.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All you can hope is those people will look for the right sources, and
Yeah. For sure.
as we mentioned, when you have a website name like House Snake Morphs, I'm sure it's not extremely hard for people to find you.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of worked out that way, didn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if you type it in, it's odds are pretty good. You're going to find a picture of one of my animals for sure.
Okay.
I've done a lot of photography of the various morphs because it was hard to find any photos of the various morphs. One person I know that has an amazing collection, and he's one of my, I would like to consider him a mentor at least. Rolf Dennison of Ultimate Exotics down in South Africa. I got so much stock from him. I love his bloodlines. So like I'm saying, I may be the guy for US, but I'm definitely not of all the world. There's lots of African people who are doing crazy cool things. And it's definitely worth looking into, for sure.
Awesome.
But yeah, lots going on there.
Yeah. So now it's, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
No, so I was going to ask, so if he's kind of like your mentor and in South Africa, so have you imported a lot of animals?
Yes, a lot actually. A lot of my stock came from all over the world because I had to hunt it down. So I have in my collection, a lot of them did come from Africa. Some of them came from Italy. Some of them came from Europe. I have a couple from friends of mine that I still talk to pretty regularly over the internet. I have some from Germany. So it's pretty eclectic. I spent about 3 years there where I was just ravenously grabbing up various. And it helps to have friends in other countries who, can go into those localities and kind of pick stuff for you, get you what you need. So I have friends in Africa that really helped me get locality pure stuff where I could know that it actually was that, it was the exact thing. So that's nice to have for sure. I owe a lot of my success to my friends. I think we all do, don't we?
Yes, 100%.
For sure. It's a community. It's a community for sure.
Yeah.
Huh.
And
Yes.
now, so you were getting a lot of captive bred animals, but what about were you getting any wild caught stuff as well? I assume when we get into the file snakes, that's maybe where some of the wild happen.
Yeah, definitely. So I have the ability. I have my own centrifuge. I have my own, basically my own little miniature lab, and I do a lot of work in parasitology.
Okay.
And that's kind of how I got into file snakes and fascinations that happen there. It's kind of like my second love is the understanding of parasitology. So, but yes, I have definitely taken in quite a bit of wild caught animals in over the years. My most recent like kind of setup was I took in a black pitch black file snake that a friend of mine
Oh,
was like, "Hey, I got this imported black file snake. Do you want it?" I'm like, yes. you know? uh, but she almost died on me too. But
really?
we saved her. She actually had 2 clutches now for me, so I'm pretty
Oh
excited
wow,
about it.
awesome.
But that was a while ago.
Okay.
But yeah, so I definitely do. I try to help people with it too. I can't like practice veterinary medicine for people, but
Right,
there's some
right.
things that you can legally do that I help people with when I can. So helps
Okay.
to be in, obviously on that. But
Yeah.
but yeah, I certainly got like some of my Zambians are actually from Zambia, which is pretty cool. I have lineatus that are actually from Tanzania. How do you say that one? Tanzania. There it goes.
Tanzania.
Tanzania, yeah. So yeah, I do have locality pure stuff, and I have some friends out in Africa that were like, "Yeah, we can get you if you want it wild caught, get it wild caught." And I was like, "Well,
Okay.
that's the only way I know, for sure.
Yeah.
I wanted it from the source." So yeah, some of it did start wild caught for sure. I mean, house snakes don't really have crazy parasites,
Okay.
like we'll get into files, but house snakes really don't like they don't have anything above the usual, a little bit of pinworm, some strong leotes, like that kind of stuff. Nothing that like panicure and flagell won't treat. So,
Okay.
and I mean, yeah, African ticks and mites that you can get and that sort of thing. I'm not advocating for people going out and buying wild caught. Obviously, if you're inexperienced, you certainly need to be in the captive
100%.
category.
Yup. Yup.
Just that they have for those that are more advanced keepers, they actually have really manageable treatment. So it kind of works out nice if you're trying to get locality pure stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And even I know for myself, like I would never even consider it because I know I don't have the proper setup, nor do I have the knowledge. Like I have a lot to learn when it comes to that stuff. But as I look more into like some of the Asian colubrids, maybe it's something I'd have to do in the future, but definitely not right now. And there's definitely a lot I'd have to learn. So if anyone's watching this, just know April has a ton of experience with it, and
I
it's definitely not
actually to I'm trying to find out the legalities of it because I intend to show how to do it. I would like to put a page into my website where I can show people step by step the exact process of
okay.
how to treat something, wild caught, how to like do a centrifuge fecal float, that just kind of that kind of stuff, like how we go about treating wild file snakes, how to go about, you know, doing things that for sure, so that the average layman can like improve their keeping,
Right.
because it is true, unfortunately, that people will sell wild caught stuff as if it was captive born, that mislabeling we were talking about ahead of time. So it
Yeah.
really help to have those skills. I mean, obviously, people that are taking in stuff could bring it to a vet and have them do it, but it is kind of a nice skill to have. So
Yeah, and also not everyone has that like exotics vet super nearby. Like not everyone can see,
true.
depending on where they're at in the country, not everyone has a reptile vet nearby. So I know it would probably
A lot of
benefit
them,
people to know.
it's like when I was starting with files, like the lungworm that they get infected with. the lung fluke actually. It's very heavy. It has a very heavy ova. So when they do like a standard float, which is like the cheapest option, they're gonna miss it. They pretty much always do. And I actually brought this into the university once and showed how dramatic of an how much it improves if you do dramatic smear versus a passive float versus like a centrifuge float. And the ability to see that, it goes from like 25% to like roughly 60, 57%, all the way up to like 95, 96. So you have, so even if you do have an exotics vet that is willing to run tests, they may not know the right test for what we're looking for, because not a lot of vets are sitting there like, oh, let me study on the African file snake. Like,
Right.
They don't. So yeah, so sometimes it's good to have these skills. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But anyway, we've digressed.
All right. Yeah. Let's talk about the files. Let's get into those. So
Ooh,
let me see if I could pull up your Instagram.
And then we can swing back to genetics on houses.
Yeah, sure.
There's more to say on that one. For sure.
Let's see if I can show this. Guys, I don't think I could see the chat right now, but if you're seeing this, this is a purple file snake. Oh, okay. I can see it on my YouTube screen. Yeah, so this is a purple file snake, and that's pretty damn interesting. And just other stuff here.
Let's talk.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so files naturally have pink pigment in the wild. If you find a wild-caught file snake, the odds are they're going to have kind of some of that in the base, in the skin. And files also do have chromatophores in their skin, so they are able to fire up and down, just like a crested gecko, if you will. Fire up and down.
Yep.
They don't have blood-fed scales, which is really interesting. We'll get into that. But so they can change color of their skin, but not their scales, which is kind of strange, right? But that's because they have a defense mechanism with their scales that allow them to pop their scales off and then regrow them. So if something were to bite onto them, they could release those scales and get away, which is, I mean, how cool is that, right? It's like the anole dropping thing, but
right.
So, and it also is kind of complicating though too, because like a lot of snakes you can tell if they're like wild caught or whatever by the fact that they're like having scars or like missing scales or stuff like that.
Yeah.
You can't. So that's not how that works, because they can pop them off at any time.
Okay.
So that's kind of not a good indicator if a file is wild caught. Most files are wild caught. There are a few dedicated breeders of file snake. Obviously, I'm one of them. Haley Sager breeds file snake, which is really cool. I know there's a few other guys that do. I know there's plenty of people who I've like sold breeding pairs to, so that they can start them, and I think that's just wonderful. I would love to see a lot more captive-born file snakes, just because the wild-caught population is kind of rough. They do some parasites that are transmittable to people, and they are not pleasant, and I know from experience because I had it once. That's actually developed a treatment for that. So the African lung fluke is a nasty little bug that it comes in on snails or slugs that the file snakes eat. And file snakes are not picky eaters. They will eat just about freaking anything, and they even eat they even scavenge. So they'll go out and they eat dead stuff, right?
Interesting.
Yeah, right. Not a lot of snakes do that, but they do. So if they eat these slugs are the carrier for the African lung fluke, and then they get infected, and then they can infect others by either their fecal matter or through their oral mucosa. So like if their spit gets on something, it contains ova that they can then infect with. And it is zoonotic, so people can catch it as well. Which is really, really, I think, underscores the importance of the captive breeding of file snakes, because captive-born file snakes never get exposed to any of that, so they never have it, so they live really good long lives. I actually just recently had to euthanize my oldest file snake, Medusa. She was 23, and we missed her terribly. She was a great snake. And
At 23 years old, that's no joke. So that's a good
yeah,
life for sure.
good long life, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So they do live a long time. A lot of file snakes, when they come in from the wild, people, or God forbid, they get sold as captive born when they're not. They'll live for maybe 2 or 3 months and then die unexpectedly, just kind of suddenly
Okay.
die. And that usually is because they had the lung fluke. It attached to the lung. It burrows through the lung eventually. It feeds on blood and causes a big hole. And unfortunately, the treatment is not terribly great either. So we have an oral treatment. There's been a few treatments that have been made over the years. There was an attempt made with ivermectin for a little while there, but it was so deadly that it most of the time killed the host and not the parasite.
Got it.
Not a great way to play it. We've been having a lot of good success with praziquantel, which is actually the same treatment that we use for flukes and other types of animals. So it kind of seemed obvious, but it is, again, like, so here's like the effective dose and here's what's going to kill the snake. So it's just not one that like we have layman's doing, because it requires a very precise dose and administered it very precisely. And a lot of people, and it's a very low dose too, which is, if you don't have a good like milligram scale that you can rely on, it's very kind of hard for people who aren't really experienced in it. And then another problem is we can use that for file snakes that have been exposed through other file snakes. Say, for example, if they came in like on the docks and they had like they put them in these big crates and they all go all over each other. It's awful, terrible practice. But they get exposed. Well, they don't have an active worm yet, a fluke in their lung. We can treat them with praziquantel, and that'll save their life. But if they have an active worm already, fluke, I keep saying worm, then the fluke will die from the treatment, but then it's still in the lung, and it will rot in there, and pneumonia. So unfortunately, the only thing you can do to save a wild file snake that has the lung fluke and it's an active worm already is you have to go down with an endoscope and manually remove them under anesthesia. And reptiles, let's be honest, they don't always do great under anesthesia. So just that alone can do it. And then sometimes they just don't survive the procedure. And so it's rough out here for wild caught files. It is really rough. So you definitely want a captive born one. The cool things about the file snake, moving back into the cool things, if you will, file snakes are incredibly intelligent. They learn who their owners are. I've shown it at shows many times where people will handle them and they'll be moving around, and then I'll take them back and put them in my hand, and within seconds they're just sit. So then that's because they learn you and they trust you. So they're really smart. They do feed puzzles really well. So like you can.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they're really smart at it. And they actually have a really neat body for that job too, because they can kind of unbury stuff. In the wild, they would be. So, it makes sense. They kind of have a shovelly snout. So they can unbury their food. You could actually put bedding over top of it and they will find it if they want to eat it. So that's pretty neat. So they're really smart. They have a really cool body shape. Not a lot of snakes are triangles. They are entirely a triangle. Cool. And they're really fun. They don't like have they can't really hurt you. There's not like venom or constriction or anything that they're going to be able to use for that. So we use them a lot for ambassadors, for people that are scared of snakes. So and you've been to one of my shows, so you've seen me out with one. But we do tend to keep them out a good bit because they're pretty hardy if you get them captive born, and they're so pretty. So we have 3 lines now for the file snake for colors. One is the pink line, which is the oldest line, so that's where the majority. And then there's a purple line that was developed off of a purple file that came in that was wild caught, and then eventually we kind of like line bred that too. And then the black, which we haven't released any of yet, simply because there just hasn't enough of them to let me go yet. But pretty cool. Wild caught ones tend to be kind of like a gray. That's just kind of the color. And sometimes you can see some wild caught ones come in where they got a good amount of pink to them. And that's kind of how we started the pink line, was just taking in those that were exceptionally colored.
Right.
But yeah. Oh, I see we have a question.
Yes. Ivory. Yeah, I'll read it to you. That's fine. Ivory Colubrid Co. was asking, what would you tell someone who's interested in file snakes but afraid of lungworm? As long as CB captive bred, they're safe, right?
Absolutely. If they're captive bred, and they were born, from captive bred parents and all of that, then you have nothing to worry about, because the parasite only can exist where it has been exposed. So if it is in captivity and it never got anywhere near those slugs or snails that are the carriers, then it would have never had any opportunity to be exposed to that, to the fluke. So as long as it's captive born, you don't have to worry about that.
And again, as we kind of touched on earlier, like if you want to ensure you're getting captive bred, you go through the right people. You go through people like April who have the captive bred animals, because it's hard to tell when and I even think about this for myself. I'm sure because I'm newer to selling stuff, people may not believe me about certain things, but I mean, I guess I'll have to roll with those punches as they come and establish myself a little bit more. But there are definitely people out there who are breeding them. So I think, as a consumer, you just have to look in the right places.
Yeah, I think here's a way to kind of, guess. So if you're at a show and you're at a table and they have a file snake and it's $100 or less and they have a ton of other species from the same area, the odds are very good that it's going to be wild caught. Okay. And you're taking a gamble on that. Even if
Unless you're in Florida at your table.
Yeah, here at my table. Oh, I only really have 3 species that I keep at
my
table, to be fair. To be fair. But yeah, that's a gamble. And I do charge more than 100. But I have to, because captive breeding is more expensive than just reselling. Yeah. Yes. But yeah, so that's one way to tell. If it's got ticks on it, it's wild caught. Absolutely. If you find a tick on it, it's wild caught. That's the only way you get those. The African tick, it's wild caught. If you get it home and it starts vomiting very soon after getting it home, it's probably wild caught. Because that's a common first symptom for the lung fluke, is they'll start vomiting. That's unfortunate when that happens, but that's the truth. So there's ways to know if something is wild caught. Kind of, like you can kind of edge your bets, but there's not like a definitive answer. If you bring it home and you take it to a vet and they do a fecal and you get lung fluke over, that's a good sign. Now it's not possible for lung fluke or other parasites to spread from one member of a captive colony into another member of a captive colony that is captive bred. So it's not necessarily that whoever you bought it from lied to you, but it could be that they bought a wild caught one assuming it was captive born and it spread over. That there's parasitology is interesting like that. But yeah, there's ways. But to answer the question, you're fine if it's you're buying a captive born baby. They haven't been exposed to anything. Unfortunately, captive hatch, you can't say the same. A lot of people think that if they are collected from eggs that are collected from gravid wild caught mothers, then the babies that hatch from them should be perfectly fine. It's not actually true. There's actually several studies that have shown that wild caught gravid snakes, they can through the mucosa lay that, and for example, like with file snakes, they only gestate for incubate for 2 months. So if the parasite can live for 3 months and it's on the outside of the shell, boom, they catch it the second they have. Or some parasites actually can penetrate through the egg and infect developing embryos. They don't typically hatch though when that happens, but it has been documented. It is something that can be done. So Not saying, obviously captive hatch is a safer bet than straight up wild caught, but it's not perfectly safe either, unfortunately.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now here's a question I kind of had, because I know the captive bred specimens of file snakes, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're relatively limited, right? Just
Um,
the
I
numbers in captive collections.
I'm running 65 females
Okay.
um, this year, and last year I produced 380,
Oh wow.
85. So I have a pretty big outfit.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
that's but I know there's a few other people, especially people here in Florida, like they come to the show and they see them, and I let them
Yeah.
play with them, fall in love with them, and then we have a new
Yeah.
file here, and I love it.
Okay.
Um, so I know a few other breeders of things that aren't specifically odd stuff like I work in, that have pairs now that are breeding them too. So
Okay.
that is on the whole, like if you're not from Florida and you're going to a show, odds are very good it's going to be wild caught. Unfortunately, we're
Okay.
working on it, but we haven't got to that level of
There you
distribution.
go.
Um,
Okay.
yeah.
My kind of point leading into that was I was curious if the captive collections, besides yours maybe, are relatively small. Are the bloodlines kind of limited, and will you still have to keep importing stuff to keep them fresh? That was kind of what I was getting to, if you're
So
understanding.
I'm only on my 5th generation, but if you
Okay.
about 3 years deep for each generation, that's 15 years. It's a long time.
Gotcha.
But 5 generations deep, I have not had any problems with inbreeding, and I am
Okay.
line breeding, so
Okay.
they are pretty hardy. And
Got
the
it.
only and they have really high hatch rates. I think I have like maybe one or two a year where it's like, but it's usually because I it's usually a mold thing. Usually, if it doesn't hatch, it's a mold thing.
Okay.
But files are pretty easy to breed.
Cool.
Um, they will fight. Males will fight each other to the
Yep.
death. So you don't put
Okay.
males. Um, and they're super easy to sex. Oh my gosh, because they're a triangle. They're when you go to sex them, you do need to pop them. Okay, pop them.
Okay.
I'm gonna tell everybody you
Yep.
can't rely on tail sexing, but because they're a triangle and it's so tight underneath, you typically can see where the hemipenes end. Like
Okay.
just it's like a bump and then it's and then tail.
Gotcha.
But there are occasionally short hemipene males, and you
Gotcha.
swear that they're girls. And I've done it twice now. I've seen it twice now where I've sexed a file and I was like, oh, that's got to be a female. And then I did it and it was a short hemipene male.
Okay.
So don't rely on it, but
Yeah.
it's pretty easy just for the majority of the
Yep.
time. You're going to see it.
Yeah, and the tail sexing is most definitely not close to accurate when it comes to colubrids.
Oh, yeah.
I have a Texas rat here. You know, she gave me her first clutch this past year, but when I had a little less experience a few years ago, like I was asking in some Facebook groups, and I showed a picture of the tail. And if you saw this tail, you would swear, anyone would swear it's a male, and it's just not. I mean, the tail is huge on this girl. So yeah, those aren't good indicators. Like popping is really
Oh,
is
really?
the way.
Even with probing, like when you go to vet school, that's what they teach you is probing.
Yeah,
I hate probing because I mean you can just even the slightest bit too much pressure and you've perforated and sterilized and potentially killed them. Like
that's
it's
what I'm scared of. Like I don't want to probe. I want to just
I'm
pop his
good
babies and be done with it.
because I've had to become good at it, but I don't like to do it. I'm really good at popping. I've even popped a blue tongue skink, and supposedly that's a pop
Really?
too because they have coiled hemipenes, like the curl.
Okay.
I can do that though. So like I'm very good at popping. So I just prefer to pop in
Yeah.
general. But yeah. Files are a lot of fun though. They're a lot of fun.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, are you working with multiple species of them? Because there's a few different species of files, or is
Three
it okay?
species of files. There's the capensis file, which is big, 6 feet, has big teeth and eats. I wouldn't know if I'd call them big teeth, but it's got teeth, and they eat other snakes.
Okay.
That's really their drawback. Big, beautiful, have a white stripe down the back. They're gorgeous, but in the wild, they pretty much only eat other snakes. And now you can convert them to rodents, but you're going to have their lifespan. And it's just a rude thing to do. So do that. I do keep Poensis. So there's Cross-Eye, which is the file snake we all know and love. That's the ones that we're trying to breed and get established in captivity. Those ones, rounded face. They're either pink or purple, no stripe. Pretty easy to find, to tell. Then there's Poensis. They're arboreal, which is kind of odd. They have big rectangular face. It's a long snout with rectangular face. And they eat exclusively lizards. And they're I have been trying with Poensis for a long time, and I just this year got one converted to where it would eat like a frozen thawed lizard. That took a lot of doing. So they're not very easy, unfortunately. Really, the species you want is Cross-Eye. They're so easy and they're so fun, and that's the one you want. But yes, I do. I work in a lot of actually kind of rarer species of Lamprophiids just because I'm a nerd. But I wouldn't recommend a lot of those ones to beginners at all, or even to intermediate kind of people. You really have to have a passion for it to work in a couple of those because they're really difficult. Even to somebody who kept snakes their whole lives, they can be a little hard.
Got it.
Capensis is gorgeous. Don't get me wrong. Everybody loves the capes, but they're hard. They're not beginner snake.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know you wanted to get back to some of the house snake stuff, so go right ahead. Hit me with some more.
Okay, so house snakes have a few things going on. We have localities, right?
Yeah.
We have true genetics, meaning stuff that's passed genetically, and then we have polygenetics. Right? So if you're familiar, I'm sure your viewers are probably familiar with what polygenetics are. So take, for example, I love using crested gecko because it's just so easy.
Yeah.
And most people have some experience with it. You take Dalmatian spots on a crested gecko, right?
Yes.
Now, you're not guaranteed that if you pair two Dalmatians together that every baby's going to look exactly like them, but you're going to get pretty close, right?
Yeah.
And you might get some that are even better. And so there's the kind of like a range of those Dalmatian spots that you get from those offspring, right?
Yes.
House snakes work the same way with pattern.
Interesting.
So, pattern, there are a few different, what we call like polygenes, if you will, where, like, for example, granite. Granite's one that I've worked in for a really long time. And I hate to call things by that name, but I have to call it something. And I hate to be the guy, this chick in the U.S. that named it, because I really feel like the Africans should have that. But since nobody gave it a name, I just kind of did. So granite reminds me of the granite Burmese pythons, where they got that speckling.
Yep.
If you breed two granites together, you're going to get granites. That's just you're going to get that. But you might get something with a little bit of like kind of the spotted kind of pattern from the Cape. So it's not like a perfect, not a perfect cross, like how you would assume, genetics work in like ball pythons, where it's like, this is codon, put them together. You might make a super, you might make more codons. It's not like that, but it's pretty close with some of these. Granite is a polygene, if you will. Stripes are a polygene. You can take two of the like full striped kind of house snakes, put them together. You will create more stripes, but you also will create some that aren't exactly. So there you have it. So various things that you create end up being polygenetic, where you can put your best of them together, and you're likely to make more. But is it perfectly genetic in the sense of like how, if you pair two Mojaves, you're going to get Mojave. Well, actually, yeah. Or you're going to get super Mojave. It's not like that. It's more like
Gotcha.
how it is in crested geckos, where you pair
Yeah.
the back, you'll get stuff that's more like it. So that's polygenes, right? And that mostly runs in pattern, right?
Got it.
So you have some genetics, right? Some straight genetics. They are, to my knowledge, all recessive, kind of like corn snakes, all recessive. So there's a ton of that. But let's talk bases. You got your two forms of albino. And then I have a thing called extreme gene albino, which is compatible with T negative albino, but they make orange babies no matter what I pair it to. So it might be like a kind of a codon thing, because I've tried pairing it to straight T negatives where it was just T negative and extreme gene, and I put them together just to see if it would like dilute the orange. It doesn't. Not sure why, but there's a lot of that going on right now, especially in my colony, because I have such a broad range of them that I can kind of play around if I want. And I've done a lot of pairings to try to figure out taxonomy too, but that's one of the things. So we'll call it two albinos, but extreme gene albino.
Could they be allelic by any chance? Just the way you mentioned it almost sounded like it's possible.
I think it is, but I can't prove it. So as soon as
got it.
I have another one that's like that too, called face mask, where it creates stripes and then there's a white mask, which I discovered that in 2020 when we were all in COVID, right? And so I was like, oh, she's got like a face mask on, and then it became the name face mask.
Gotcha.
And that's another one. I'm actually pairing two visuals because I finally raised up one to 3 years, because that was 3 years ago. So we're going to find out how that works out genetically this season, which is pretty cool. Very exciting. So there's a few things like that. I also have a thing that I call inverted albino, but that's just T negative albino with some sort of weird additional kind of gene thing going on that fractures pattern. It's really cool, but that went out yet either. So it's another project. So we got a lot of house snakes right now, kind of project unproven kind of stuff that we're working on. And then so going back into, the base genes. So we have albino, we have hypo. Hypo is really fun. It's a little harder to work with just because, well, that actually is a great segue into the chromatophore situation. So house snakes can fire up and down. So say you have a hypo, right? And hypo is known for basically diluting color down and very, very far. Well, in an animal that can fire up and down, you can see why that would be problematic for the determining if an animal is visually hypo, because it could just be a very fired down version of what you're looking at. Typically speaking, we have one called sunglow. Really not a great term for it. But it's T positive and hypo. Those are pretty easy to tell because of how the white base pattern kind of raises up, and then they tend to have kind of green eyeballs. So that's an easy tell. But it's impossible to tell a T negative hypo from a T negative. You can't. It's impossible. The only way to do it is to breed it and make other hypos that are visual. That's the only way to know. And I actually have a 3 gene that's a T positive, T negative hypo. That one was fun. And her name is Moonglow. That's not the name of the morph. That's just her name. Just to get out there. Because I get asked about it a lot. I want a Moonglow. I'm like, that's not what it's called. But they are really pretty. They have kind of a like a teal blue eye with the red pupil. If you have a T negative and T positive, they will have the red pupil, not the black. So that's one way. The only way you can tell a T negative from a T positive, well, I'm not going to say only, but the most reliable way is T negatives have red eyes and T positives have black eyes. So the pupils are red. So that's really the most reliable way. But there also is, if you've seen a few of them, like you go through a few hundred, you can tell a T negative from a T positive just by the fact that T positives have more caramel color. Like it's because they have the tyrosinase, so it produces that kind of caramel pigment, whereas the T negatives don't. But that you have to see a lot of them to really develop that kind of eye. So I wouldn't.
Okay.
But that is.
I work with the ball pythons too, so I am familiar with a lot of the with the ball pythons. There's different T negative and T positive albinos, and they're pretty stark,
all over
very
the place.
different. Yep.
So that helps out. So yeah, there's a few, strictly genetic things, but then there's localities like we were talking about earlier, right? And then you cross those together and create different phenotypes based off of any of those playgrounds. Like you can, like I have right now, I have a red Kenya albino stripe. It's very cool. It's, just white, red stripes and the red eyes. Very cool looking. So, there's so much that you can play with in house snake. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to brag on the ball industry, especially to kick it while it's down. But I bred balls for 12 years. So I know.
Okay.
I know the struggle. Most of my friends that I made down here, I made back when I was ball breeding. And that's all right.
Yeah.
But my passion has always been the house snake. So here we are.
Yeah.
But like I was saying, they only really have a few colors, right? We got white, black, yellow, brown.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a green ball python? You haven't.
No.
Have you ever seen a red ball python that's truly red?
They're trying to. They're trying their hardest.
Yeah. I mean, you get kind of that brick red. That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing that. But have you ever seen a pink one? Have you ever seen an opal, white with blue sheen on it kind of ball? You haven't. No. House snakes have that. House snakes have all of that. They have every color. Every color you can think of. Purple. Not so much on purple. But we got that in files. So we got that covered in the Lamprophiid family. We got every color. So I really think that house snakes have a lot of potential. It really kind of blows my mind that
they always remind me with their eye stripes. They remind me of little pythons.
They really do, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah.
They have that face shape too. That
that as well.
Yeah, and they don't behave like corns or garters. They really don't have that kind of behavior. So they kind of behave more. Well, I worked in elapids, and so that's what it reminds me of. It's almost like cobras, where they kind of but chill, calm.
Yeah.
Like a calm version. Closer to what people would to understand more broadly would be they're more like pythons, really. They're not going to sit in a ball, in the back. I mean, they do their humid hides, but they're not like that kind of. They're not like a pet rock, like how like a ball python's just gonna. It's not gonna move, and you're just gonna. But they do like to hang out on their people. Like you can handle them and have them up in your hand, and do other things doing that because. They do like that sort of thing. They do handle very well.
Okay.
But yeah, they're different. They're different.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Like I was saying at the beginning, I just think the house snakes are underrated species. Now, if we could talk about just even on a pet level, what would you rate their ease of care? Can we talk about husbandry a little bit?
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. When you think about what everybody claims is a beginner's snake. Okay, think in your mind of what's the list of beginner snakes, right? You think about corn snake, you think about ball python, maybe milk snake, rat snake, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I've kept and bred them all. I have. Balls can be fussy eaters. They can have their own problems. They really can.
Oh, I know.
Kings, they tend to bite you. They do. I love them.
Kings will bite, yeah.
But they're biters. They will not. They cannot tell the difference between your finger and a pinky, and that's cute. But it's not always that fun. Corns kind of running into the same kind of problems, and they all have kind of a lot of the same kind of care requirements, like. As far as, setting up an environment and making sure that it's appropriate, you got the right heat, the right humidity. You're going to have that no matter what species you're working in. right?
Yeah.
You're going to have. So do I think that house snakes are good beginner's pets? Absolutely. Because the environment setup is African. So if you're okay with a ball python setup, you should definitely be okay with the house snakes because they're from the same place. So same there. As far as feed goes, watch your fingers. House snakes are very good feeders. Very good feeders. On occasion, and I will, let me specify, Cape house snakes especially are amazing feeders. I mean, I go through my racks and I'm seconds. Not like sitting there with the dangle and jangle and all that like you do with both. It's just open it, shut it, open it. I can get through 100 or so in an hour. It's like it's so fast. It's so fast. I do a whole 400 colony in an hour and a half. Like it's very quick. You do on a rare occasion run into a baby that will not eat frozen thawed, but the heavy majority are going to eat frozen thawed. So they're very easy. I mean, compared to some of the dramas that I went through working in other snakes, I mean, there's a reason I breed house snakes. You know what I'm saying? They're easier. They have so much fun things you can do with them genetically. They breed very well. Not like you've heard. A lot of people they breed like old king snake forms where it says, "Oh, they'll breed 6 times a year, and you can't make that many of them because they'll drive the market down and blah blah." It's not true, guys. If you are a reasonable breeder of snakes, like you're a reasonable human being, you will breed them once a year. They will produce 2-3 clutches, and then you will give them the rest of the year off. And if you don't, you will pay for that because if your female does not stop, you can. It is true. You can, after those 2 or 3 clutches, pair her again and then breed her again and make another 3. You can do that, but you will kill her.
I definitely didn't know that.
Yeah, it's possible.
I didn't know they went as readily as pair 1 to get 2 to 3 clutches.
Oh yeah, they will. But you will kill her.
Yeah.
Okay? If you do that twice a year, you're going to kill her. You'll maybe get 2 years, and then she's dead. So don't do that. Don't do that.
Got it.
That's rude. That's not a nice thing to do to your pet snakes. So another thing about the concept of breeding. House snakes also breed really early. Don't do that. I'm going to tell you not to do that. And I probably produce more house snakes than anybody in the U.S., and I'm telling you, don't do it. And here's why.
What would you say that's that timeline for female? Oh, you mentioned like 3 years. So 3 years is your
3 years, 250 grams. Okay. You can, yes, you can. At 120 grams, you can pair her, and you're gonna regret it because here's what's gonna happen. So say you pair your younger girl, right? And maybe it's an accident. Let's just maybe it's an accident. Here's what's gonna happen. She's gonna lay some really tiny babies. You're going to have a hell of a time getting those started, right? And they're going to be that way forever. So once you start, you can't stop. That's the problem. Once you start, and if you start her really young, she's going to have them tiny babies that are going to be difficult. They're going to be difficult because they're so tiny, because their mom was tiny. You're going to have that from that point on. Even when she's 300 grams and she's big, chunky, and she's still going to give you them tiny little babies, and you're going to hate it. So it's worth the wait. It really is. Because if you wait to where it's actually appropriate, and not only that, but those smaller girls have less resources, a lot less. So you may actually end up killing her by doing it because you breed her when she's tiny. She has those 2-3 clutches. Maybe she doesn't stop. Now that's one problem of house snake breeding is that sometimes they don't stop, and you have to stop them because if you don't, they will breed themselves to death, and that's really sad. But that's another reason why you don't breed your females early, even though yes you can, and you'll read on websites. Well, I bred her when she was only 18 months old. Research papers will say the same thing where they're like they use them for cobra food or they use them for research papers, and they say, oh, well, we got her up to 120 grams of bred her and blah blah. She's dead within 2 years. Do you want one that's going to live 15 years, or do you want one that's and produce for you the whole time, or you want one that's going to live for 2 years and give you tiny babies that are a pain in the ass? And take it from me. Believe me, because I've made mistakes in my journey too, and I'm telling you, you don't want to do that.
Okay.
Give it it's worth the wait. So
and with colubrids, I've never quite understood. Like, I feel like I've seen very small, like even corn snakes, where people are like, "Yes, she laid last year." I'm like, "Laid?" I'm like, "How did that animal even have eggs?" But the 3 to 5 years, like I could see, my my rat snake that gave me a clutch this year, like she was a 5-year-old girl. She hadn't been bred before. I could see the success from that. She double clutched without me trying. The second clutch wasn't as good. It wasn't viable besides one egg, but I know that, that 5-year mark was clearly good. She's nice, big, chunky, and never been bred before. So
it is worth it. It is things you learn as you grow. But if I can get that one out to people who are just getting started into house snake breeding, wait, it's worth it.
Yeah.
Wait, I got one girl. Her name's Death Star. Interesting story behind her, but we'll skip that for now. And she has clutches of 13 twice a year, and she is big, chunky. She does great, and she gives me 2 times the size of eggs than other ones that, because I waited for her. She was actually a pet because she had an unfortunate beginning, and so she was a rescue, and I basically took her in and funny story, but so she didn't get bred until she was 5, and ever since then she's a machine. I'm telling you, it's worth it to wait on them if you can, and you can. So do. And it's the same for males too, by the way. Yes, you can raise a male to 18 months. And then he will breed. But here's the problem. He will stop growing. He's just going to stop. Now, you can breed an 18-month-old male to a smaller female, like say like a black or something, that's not going to get as big. But if you want to take down a big chunker with that little male, he's not going to be able to do the job. And you will have stunted him for life. So worth it to wait if you can. About 2 is a real solid time frame for males. And really, that's not a long wait, y'all. Like, it's not long.
Like, males are always a shorter wait. Any species for the most part. That we're really.
If he's eating like full hoppers, he's got a good chunk. Then you can pair him. But when he's scrawny and he's like on fuzzies and stuff, I've seen people do it, and I'm like, you're gonna regret that. You're gonna regret that down the line. But everybody learns. We're all growing, in it.
Of course.
So, for sure.
Something I always like talking about, because this is called the Colubrid Corruption Podcast, but I always like finding out if there are any other species in the collection. I always go off the rails with this one, like non-colubrids or maybe some other colubrids that I didn't mention or I'm not aware of. Please go into that.
Right. So my biggest project that is not actually a Lamprophiid would be my egg-eating snakes.
Okay.
Egg eaters are not a Lamprophiid. They're technically a colubrid. So they have fascinating stuff. They're really interesting. They only eat eggs. That's a big one. And they have all sorts of adaptations. I'm actually just this week I am releasing an entire page that's going to go over everything you could possibly want to know about egg-eating snakes, how to breed them, how to feed them if you don't have eggs, available, how to work around that sort of, issue. And it's going to be great. I've been running both ends, a little busy, but that's definitely one that I work in a lot. It's my 3rd largest colony. But I also do keep Calabar python. I have a small colony of calibars, not technically pythons, but that's what they call them.
Okay.
It's African, another African snake. I keep mostly, well, no, everything actually is African in here.
Okay.
Just thinking about it, I'm like, no, everything is.
Yeah.
But Calabar python's really cool. They have, what was it, like their scales are the thickest scales. They actually started harvesting them from the wild to try to figure out their scales for body armor. It's like
Interesting.
really, really nuts. I wouldn't call them a beginner snake though. I wish they were, but they're nest raiders, and
Okay.
because I really think we'll break them of it as we create them in captivity, just like how some house snakes were originally solely gecko feeders, and now they only eat rodents and they still live long lives. We can break them of it, but right now there isn't a lot of dedicated Calabar keepers that are really trying to do that. But yeah, I have a small colony of those guys. I'm hoping to get some eggs this year from them. Pretty neat little species there, and they need some conservation efforts too. So that's pretty cool. Let me think. What else? Madagascar giant hognose.
Okay.
That was originally a Lamprophid. They got recently elevated into their own family, but yeah, I do work in the Madagascar giant hognose. I've produced a few clutches of them. I wouldn't say that I haven't quite worked out the kinks.
Okay.
That
Got it.
those guys. But I have made a few, so I guess I can say I breed them, even though I wouldn't say I breed them in the same respect of quantity or quality of file or house snake for sure. But I do. I work in those. I also work in the Egyptian false cobra, or the hooded malpoon, which is a, they say it's mildly venomous, and I'm not trying to rag on the guy that, what's his name? He did a video and he said, "Do they make good pets?" And he's like handling it. That's a dumb thing to do. From a breeder, let me tell you why. So those guys need to be kept at 115 degrees. They are a
Really
desert species, and if you don't give them access to that, they're going to very slowly, unfortunately, very slowly, die, because they do need that level of heat. So of course, when you're handling an animal that shows its true colors and lives at 115 degrees, and then you start handling him at 70 degrees in your room temp, he's going to go, "Oh, look how chill they are."
right.
Anything that's 50 degrees colder than its body temp should be is going to be chill. Not to discourage people from EFCs. I do love them. I do breed them. They're incredibly intelligent. They are fast. They're quick. They're if you like cobras, you're gonna love it, because they pretty much are one. The only thing is that they're currently listed as having mild venom. No.
More?
No, they are not. That's
not at all.
a lot of people kind of like perpetuate, is that but I can tell you, here's an experience that I had. I actually worked in HOTS for a little bit of time there, and I've been tagged by a couple too. So I can tell you that venom is rough. It's not just like hog nose kind of venom. It will unmake your day. That's what I tell people at shows. It unmakes your day. I got bit in the hand while trying to harvest eggs from a female and her male who was guarding the nest. That's another cool thing about them, is they have really interesting behaviors. But he bit me, and this whole arm down to the elbow, swollen. And then we're talking all systems evacuate. Like, didn't matter what hole. Was puking. There was diarrhea. There was all sorts of stomach cramps. There was a sweat involved. I am not kidding. Those guys are spicy. like it really makes me cringe when I see people like just free handling them, or they sell them at shows. They don't even tell people they're venomous or anything. It's like, they're spicy. They really are. Like, don't get bit by those. And their rear fang, it's actually mobile too. Like, they can move it forward. So yeah, they're a little spicy, but they're fun. They're a lot of fun. They're not regulated, so they're not like classified as venomous enough that you would need like a thing if you wanted to work with them. But just it's better. That species is better worked with by people who have some understanding of HOTS. That kind of shift box and that kind of thing.
Right.
because they're fast, they're smart, and they're spicy. So there's that. But that's my
Okay.
spice for sure. The Madagascar giant hognose does have some mild venom, but it's actually mild, like how you would get with other hognose, where it's
Right.
more. It's there, but it's not a big deal, kind of thing. But yeah, no, not the EOC. Learned that one the hard. Yeah.
Matt.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So that's it species wise, kind of all those hit
Red
all
and
the
black stripe
bases.
snake. I do the red and black stripe snake.
Oh, you do have those. Oh, those
Yeah.
are cool.
I'm not the first. Definitely not the first. Gosh, what was his name? He did them
And I
for.
know Matt's breeding them.
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to
Yeah,
remember.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I'm pretty sure he was the first to do it, or one of them, for
yeah.
sure. At least in our recent history, like a lot of people think that I bred the file snake first. I did not. I can show you a research paper from 1977 where a guy bred them in captivity for research
Oh,
purposes.
wow.
I'm not the first. I just
Okay.
kind of made them popular right now,
Yep.
of my generation, I suppose. So I don't know if Matt really is or not, but I would accredit him as such. But yeah, red and black stripe snake. I haven't made enough of them to really offer them to the public yet. It seems like I'm having a bit of a trouble getting males to do the job.
Okay.
And I've tried a few things. I wish I could get a hold of Matt. I know he's successfully done it. But even people that have worked in or reptiles for their whole lives, sometimes you struggle. It's
Right.
okay to struggle.
Yeah.
That's something.
Especially when it's a species that's just not commonly worked with. I mean that's kind of the thing. Me and Justin were talking about it last week about Gonyosoma janseni. Like he's one of the only people in the US trying to figure out breeding. He's been close, but has not yet really had it click for him. So
Right.
he's been waiting. But these more obscure species that people just don't have. So when you're one of the first people trying to figure it out, like sometimes you have to roll with the punches a little bit more than others down the line will.
Yeah, I mean that is science if you think about
Yep.
it. Science
Yeah.
breaks through barriers painfully sometimes, but it is a process. It's not, and that's something I wish I could kind of get through to more people is like, not none of us were born with it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
none of us were, and it's okay to not be that guy yet. Like some of the people I respect the most right now in the community haven't been in for very long. They're just willing to learn.
Yep.
And that's where it's at, guys. Don't because we get a lot of that in the community of people who like kind of pretend that they have been around for a lot longer or that they've been doing this forever, and I understand that, I guess. Like I get how that has appeal, but it pins people into a position where they feel like they can't ask for help or that they can't like talk about the struggle. And
Yeah.
there's no other way around it other than to like, hey, reach out. Like I'm always asking people, like especially people who I consider like my mentors and whatnot, like, have you tried this? And to find out, and that's how we grow as a community too, is to, develop those natural curiosities and shoot the shit,
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
how to do it. But that's like when people, it happens all the time, especially like customers of mine. They'll message me and they'll be like, "I'm sorry to ask you all these questions." I'm like, "I want you to ask me questions."
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't understand how that became a thing in the industry where like it's rude to ask questions. Like don't, but like if you're a breeder and you're in this for the right reasons,
Yeah.
you want people to understand what they're getting into. You want because you care about the
Yeah.
animal being. So like I don't understand why I have to say that so often because it kind of makes me
And
say,
plus, if you are in it for the right reasons, you enjoy educating and passing this along to
yeah,
other people because other people are your legacy, the future of the reptile hobby. I'm pretty young, so but every time I can give a teaching moment to someone, like that means a lot to me because it's like I've been keeping and seeing reptiles for the last 13 years. So it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, that means a lot whenever I could pass on even just a little smidge of
Yeah.
knowledge or even just a mindset of something I'm thinking about.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I wish I had more time to educate. That's why I'm really trying to build these pages for like the website, because
Right.
I get asked a lot of the same questions regularly,
Yep.
and I need to have something where I can point it to because you know I'm a mom too.
Okay.
I'm and I have a partner and I have a life outside of just
Of
educating
course.
everybody and
Of
the
course.
hundreds of animals I take care of and and I like to have some balance in there. My poor partner is long suffering as I always say because he allows me the space to be that guy and
Right.
I owe him a lot for that but yeah so but we do have to have some life balance, we do.
Yeah.
But it's hard for me. Like it's like Christmas wasn't too long ago, and I'm on my phone and I'm talking to customers. I'm trying to
Yeah.
trying to help people, and my partner's like, on Christmas, really?
Yeah.
No, and I'm like,
People trying to get their Christmas gifts,
yeah, yeah, and you always want to help if you can, but I understand how after you get to a certain size, it becomes harder to keep track of everybody.
Yeah.
And eventually, I would like to hire an employee to help with some of the more repetitive tasks.
Yeah.
But I'm that one guy that owns a business that won't hire somebody until I can pay them a living wage. Like I'm
Yeah.
like, and
No,
I
I
mean,
mean it's
so
fair. It makes sense. So
yeah.
props
So
to you for that.
so I always feel bad because it's like I don't want to be that guy that hires somebody and it's like, oh, I'll give you $10 and a nickel. I don't want to be that guy. Like, and I do need an employee eventually, but right
Right.
now I'm doing it, doing just fine by myself. But
Yeah. There you go.
yeah, yeah,
Awesome.
good time.
Cool. So as we kind of wrap up, I always like asking people because again, I'm always about, as we were just talking about, the education with this podcast, spreading the knowledge, passing on these species to people, to those who may have not known about them. What do you have to say to someone who I'm just going to use hognoses? What do you have to say to someone who's interested in hognose? Like, what's their first steps? Like, what should they do? And they've never kept like a colubrid species before. So
Like the Madagascar giant hog, or
no,
because
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I meant house snakes. Did I
oh,
say
okay,
hog? I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Well, for house snake, um, I have a page, and it's got an information library, a lot of resources there. So
It's in
definitely,
the description, by the way.
yeah,
The
yeah,
link to our website as well as the link to her Instagram is in the description. So go click on both of those and go check them out.
sure, sure. So education first. I think of any kind of species that you're gonna work in, okay, anything that you're looking into, read up on it first.
Yeah.
Read up on it because you might find that you're not as you know, keeping animals is a lot like keeping dogs. There's different breeds for different folks,
Right.
and house snakes pretty much apply to everybody, so that works out nice. But it is always my advice to anybody to research. Make sure it's something that you're really going to be willing to do, happy to do, enjoy doing. Because you don't want to be that guy that picks up an animal and then 4 months later decides they don't like it and tries to sell it to somebody else. It's not fair to them. You know.
Right.
So that's the first thing to do. If you're just keeping, that would be my advice. Keep first. I know a lot of kids these days. I sound so old. I kind of am though, y'all. But people that are just getting into the industry have an obnoxious habit of finding an animal that they like, and then immediately going into plans to breed it. And I don't think that that's really the best way to play it. Because you're going to invest a lot into breeding. Breeding is an investment. It really
Yeah.
is. You got to find, and But if you keep for a while and you get kind of an understanding of everything, all the quirks, because they all have them, then you're going to have a lot easier of a time when you get into the breeding, because you'll know, like, this is normal behavior versus this is behavior for that's exclusively to breeding. And that helps a lot with various things. But that's one of them. Two, it helps you to develop kind of a name. I hate to use that term because I don't want it to sound like a popularity contest, but it kind of does help. Like, for example, we're talking about the file snake thing. Like, how, if you don't have a name for file snakes and you're trying to breed and sell your babies, people might assume that they're wild caught just because you don't have the name, right?
Yep.
But if you get involved in the Facebook groups of the species that you work in, and you're up there and you're active and people see you being associated with it, that helps a lot with, if you're going to sell babies down the line. So that's places to start. So places to start for sure would be Facebook groups for the species that you're looking into, and other such social media aspects. That way you can talk with other people, kind of get a broader experience than what you have. And that will help you to know if that's something you really want to do. And honestly, here's the rub. If you're passionate about it, you're going to do it. You're going to do it. Those of us that breed snakes for a living don't do so because it makes so much money. It doesn't. Why we do it is because we can't see ourselves doing anything else. We love it, and we don't work for a living. We work for fun. And you never work a day in your life, even though you'll spend 13-hour days sometimes doing stuff.
So this is your full-time job?
Yes, it's the only job I have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes, myself and my child on nothing but. And a lot of people, when I first started, said it wouldn't be possible, but here we are.
And guess what? You really love it, and like you just said, you're doing what you love. So that's awesome that you're able to do that.
If you love it, you're gonna stay in it. So there's no need to rush. Other aspects that are kind of important, it gives you time to settle in, to develop routines and patterns that you're going to need. Like when you get to, say maybe 100, I think it really starts. Routines and patterns start to become very important after you get to a certain number. I operate best between 100 and 500. Like, that's kind of where I need to be in order to run by myself. If I had an employee, I can expand farther than that. But you will learn what your numbers kind of are if you gradually move into it. If you're going to be that guy that's going to pick up 150 snakes because you're going to crash. You're going to crash. So don't do that. Kind of lean in and find people who you know and, who you appreciate the opinion of, like-minded, people. Because it doesn't matter if you're the first guy to breed something or if you're, coming in 20 years later. Having a mentor is a thing to have. 100%. Even if they can't give you specifics on what you're working in exactly, having people that are willing to kind of like bounce ideas off of will help you a lot. And that goes back to that concept I was telling you about like, don't try to be the guy. Everybody wants to be the guy. Like, you don't want to be the guy. You want to be somebody that's willing to learn and grow. Somebody that can raise up as you go. That's where it's at, guys. That's where it's at. Yeah, for sure.
All right. I have one question from the chat before I ask you my kind of wrap-up question. From Kevin, Mutant Reptiles. How easy or hard is it to progress the purple and pinks in the file snakes?
It's fairly easy, actually. Take your best color, of your male and your best color female, put them together, and voila! Save back any that you like, and that's it. That's really all there is to it. It's just a standard line breed, You will find that babies, so the hard part with that is that babies don't have their adult colors. Babies are pretty muted. So you're not going to see babies fire up, and file snakes specifically tend to kind of go through a really amazing color change right when they hit puberty. So if you have a baby and it's already pink and it's already looking good, keep that one. Because when it gets older, it's going to have even more as it goes. So that's the way to do it. But at first, like, especially if you're working in stock that's going to be, started like a long-term captive that just happened to, work out parasite-wise. That does happen too. Okay, it's not like 100% thing that they're all going to have, lung fluke or anything like that. But say you started kind of at ground zero with like a long-term captive or something. It's going to be a little hard at first because you are going to see a lot of the same, and then you're going to find maybe one or two that's exceptional, and that one or two maybe don't make it to adulthood, and then you end up having to start over, or that kind of thing. Obviously, you can get an edge up on it if you start with a bloodline that's already been going for a while. Like, that's what I always tell people: if you want a really pink one, start with one of mine, because mine have been going through many generations,
right.
So you can kind of get a leg there. There's also a pink-purple cross thing going on now that's really cool. We thought it would kind of turn out muddy, and it did not. It actually is even better, in my opinion, but everybody has their tastes. So yeah, I mean, it's something you can certainly work out pretty quick. It's a little harder to know which ones to hold back, because if they're all kind of the same at birth, like, for example, a great example of this, I had a file snake that I sold, and he got put onto aspen bedding, which I always tell people not to do. But what happens is the dust gets in their nose, and then it gets infected, and goes up the lacrimal duct into the eye. The eye swells up real bad, and it dies.
Whoa.
That's exactly what happened to this poor boy. And then by the time that I was even made aware of this, so I sold this to somebody else, and they brought him back to me and were like, I can't afford his veterinary care, and I don't want him to die, so can you take him back in? And I was like, absolutely, because I will do that for people. So we had to take the eye, and then he became a holdback, if you will, So he stayed with me, but man, I tell you, it's kind of cool he came back around, because he's gorgeous now. Okay. And he's one of my breeders, and we call him Cyclops because of the one. But he is gorgeous now. But I let him go originally because he wasn't that well colored as a baby. It's a little tricky. It's a little, but if you get one that's
definitely with colubrids, they go through that OCC, and you can never tell. Like, the only way to really tell is hold them back as long as you can, and then decide what you're gonna release. I mean, all snake species really, I feel that they go through some sort of color change. So it's hard sometimes.
Yeah. And especially, babies aren't as prone to fire up for you just because they're scared.
Right.
You're a 200-foot alien ripping the roof of their house off, like talking some foreign language at them. They're scared of you. Like, I mean, files are not particularly frightened. They're not like a real startly kind of babies. They're usually pretty intelligent, inquisitive. They'll come out to see what's going on, kind of snakes, but still. They're not gonna. It takes a bit of trust for them to like really fire up. So, especially if you're working in hundreds of them at a time, odds are you're not going to see it unless you're really involved with that. So it's a little tricky, but it's definitely doable. I mean, I've been doing it a long time, so you can make that happen for sure.
Awesome.
And I would love to see it. I would love to see another line that wasn't from my line. That would be really cool.
Yeah.
Just so we could cross, Hey, one day, make your line. We'll cross them. It'll be fun. Have a good time.
There you go. Awesome. Well, April, you are a wealth of knowledge. You said so much stuff on this episode that I didn't even think. I don't even think I was prepared for all that information. It was a lot. And I really appreciate it. I hope the viewers do too. It's been a great hour and 45 minutes. There's been about 15 people in here the whole time, probably 20 over the whole course of the almost 2 hours. What do you have to say to everyone listening, all your supporters, and anyone else who may listen to this sometime later.
Well, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you guys. And I really do owe it all to you guys, the fans and the supporters, people who, buy animals for me. Kind of, it sets my whole life. My children are grateful. We're very grateful for it. And if you have any questions, I know I tend to ramble, but if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. It sometimes does take a little longer and other times to get a hold of me, but you're welcome to do that. And I try to mentor as many people as I can, try to educate as many people as I can. So definitely, if you're into house snakes, or you're into file snakes or egg eaters or whatnot, reach out. Let's talk. I try to be as approachable as possible. So definitely, let's hang out. We'll be nerds together. It'll be a good time.
Yep. Mm-hmm. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. I am going to put you backstage. I'm going to run the outro and we'll talk quickly after. I know you have to eat dinner.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, guys. Thank you, April.
Thanks, guys. See you later.
All right. Thanks. One sec. Guys, that was a fantastic episode for episode number 9. She is a wealth of knowledge, honestly. That was a great episode. Again, I think that whole group of species, the house snakes, the file snakes, all super underrated. If you are interested in any of those species, make sure you go check out her website and her Instagram, which are both in the description of the stream today. Go give her a follow and go check out the website. Lots of cool snakes. Guys, as usual, all my social media is down below. If you enjoyed this episode and you have not liked the video yet, what are you doing? I appreciate you watching, but go like it. Hit that subscribe button as well. We're going to keep coming in with new episodes weekly. Guest has not been determined for next week, but we will see. Oh, actually it has. We're talking locality North American rat snakes. So yeah. But guys, thank you so much. Stay tuned in for, I'm going to do like a vloggy type vlog, I guess, next week. But as always, guys, this has been episode number 9 of the Colubrid Corruption podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Today we had April Linkfield of House Snake Morphs. Thank you, everyone. Peace out. Have a great rest of your weekend and a great week. Peace.